If you could see what I once was, if you could go with me back to where I started from, then I know you would see the miracle of love that took me in its sweet embrace and made me what I am today, an old sinner saved by grace. I'm just a sinner saved by grace. When I stood condemned to death, He took my place. Now I live and breathe in freedom. With each breath of life I take, I'm loved and forgiven. I'm back with the living. I'm just a sinner saved by grace. How could I boast of anything I've ever seen or done? How could I dare to claim as mine the victories our God has won? Where would I be had God not brought me gently to this place? Oh, I'm here to say I'm nothing but a sinner saved by His grace. Oh, I'm just a sinner saved by grace. When I stood condemned to death, He took my place. And now I live and breathe in freedom. With each breath of life I take, for I'm loved and forgiven. I'm back with the living, for I'm just a sinner saved by grace. Now I live and breathe in freedom. With each breath of life I take, for I'm loved and forgiven. I am back with the living, for I'm just a sinner saved by grace. I'm saved by His grace. If you have your Bibles with you this evening, you can turn to the 6th chapter of John. We're going to continue our discussion of looking at the miracles in John that recorded by, or miracles of Jesus recorded by John. You'll remember we read a verse towards the end of the book that John said that all of the miracles that he recorded, which there was only 7, were written so that we might believe that Jesus is the Christ and believe on him. And so we've been looking at each of these 7 miracles. Now we're going to look at the feeding of the 5,000. We're going to start reading at the first verse of chapter 6. It says, "After these things, Jesus went over to the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. And a great multitude followed him, because they saw his miracles which he did on them that were diseased. And Jesus went up into a mountain, and there he sat with his disciples. And the Passover, a feast of the Jews, was nigh. When Jesus then lifted up his eyes and saw a great company come unto him, he saith unto Philip, Whence shall we buy bread that these may eat? And this he said to prove him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 pennyworth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may take a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, saith unto him, There is a lad here, which hath 5 barley loaves and 2 small fishes. But what are they among so many? And Jesus said, Make the men sit down. And there was much grass in the place. So the men sat down in number about 5,000. And Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed to the disciples, and the disciples to them that were set down, and likewise of the fishes as much as they would. When they were filled, he said unto his disciples, Gather up the fragments that remain, that nothing be lost. Therefore they gathered them together, and filled 12 baskets with the fragments of the 5 barley loaves, which remained over and above unto them that had eaten. Then those men, when they had seen the miracle that Jesus did, said, This is of truth that prophet that should come into the world. When Jesus therefore perceived that they would come and take him by force to make him a king, he departed again into a mountain himself alone." Jesus and his disciples were on the northeast side of the Sea of Galilee. They had been preaching, teaching. There had been healings done, various miracles performed. And a crowd had formed around Jesus. And it was about time for the Passover feast, and so it was getting on time to be headed to Jerusalem. And there was a whole multitude of people surrounding Christ. I get the idea or the feeling that they just weren't ready to leave yet. How much is a multitude? We don't know how much a multitude is, but there was at least 5,000 men there. Does that include men and women and children, or is it just the men? We don't know. But there was a whole bunch of people there on the northeast side of the Sea of Galilee. Jesus knew that these people, by and large, were not there because of his teaching. Mostly, these people were following him because of the miracles that he had performed. They had heard about his healings. They had heard about the lame that could walk again. And because of that, a lot of people were coming around just to see what they could see. It's true today. When we hear about something going on somewhere, 9 times out of 10, we go take a look for ourselves, don't we? See what we can see about it. That's what's going on here. Yet even though they weren't there necessarily for his teaching or to be reached by Christ, he still had compassion on them. Even though they were there so more or less for the show, he still had compassion on them. And Jesus never neglected to take the opportunity to teach his disciples a lesson or two either. You know, the disciples, as much as they spent time with Christ and heard his teachings over and over again, oftentimes they still didn't get it, did they? And so he always liked to take the opportunity to teach the disciples something. They didn't always fully understand the lessons. They didn't fully understand the lesson of this miracle that we read about tonight, but they would in time, because Christ was going to bring it back to them. So Jesus looks to Philip, one of his disciples, and said, You know, you see this great multitude that we have here with us tonight, And it's getting about time for everyone to eat, and I know everyone's as hungry as we are. Where can we go and get us something to eat? You see, Philip, this was the countryside that Philip was from. And so, if anyone knew where they could get enough food to feed everybody, it ought to be Philip, because this was like his hometown, his stomping grounds, let's say. And Philip looked over the crowd that was before him, and he looked and he thought about the countryside, and he thought about the nearby towns, and he thought about what bakers might be in those towns. And he came to the conclusion that even if they had 100 pennyworth, or 200 pennyworth of bread, if there was any chance in that countryside to even get 200 pennyworth of bread, how much bread's that? I don't know. But it sounds like a lot. Even if they could get it, that wouldn't nearly be enough to feed that kind of multitude. What was Philip telling him? Philip was saying, this is impossible. We can't do it. There ain't no way we're going to be able to do this. Philip looked at that crowd and saw the task as hopeless. But there was one boy there that Andrew knew about, and said, there is a boy here, though, that had packed him a lunch. Probably his mother sent him with that lunch. She said, if you're going out there with all them men to visit with Jesus today, you ain't going without a lunch. She said, here's 5 barley loaves. I don't know what a barley loaf is, but I like to think of a little old crusty piece of bread like you get in Italian restaurants. I don't know. And 2 small fishes. That was his lunch for the day. And he was willing to offer it up so that others could be fed. I don't know about 200 pennyworth of bread, but all Christ needed was 5 barley loaves and 2 small fishes. The disciples helped with this miracle, much like the servants helped with the turning of the water into wine. You remember when they ran out of wine at the marriage feast, Mary told the servants, whatever he tells you to do, do it. And Jesus said, go and get your pitchers and fill them full of the water, the cleansing water, the ceremonial washing water that's in those barrels. You take your pitchers and fill them up with that water, and then go take them to the governor of the feast. In that miracle, it was a group of servants that assisted Jesus in performing the miracle. Here, Jesus took the bread, he took the loaves, he blessed it, he started breaking it up into baskets. He said, all right, guys, I'm going to start just pinching this off. And every time I get a group a little bit together, you disciples go and you go distribute it to all the people. I'm just going to sit here and I'm just going to keep pinching off pieces of this. I'm going to keep pinching off pieces of this. And so the disciples took those little bits of bread and little bits of fish. And as Jesus kept on pulling it off and pinching it off and distributing it out, they gathered it up and they distributed it to all the people. See, for the disciples, there couldn't have been any doubt that the miracle occurred. They were assistants in the miracle. They were right there when it happened. They watched Jesus as he plucked each of those pieces out and just kept on distributing that out and kept on distributing. And you know, I got to think that after a while, they got to thinking, something's going on here. Maybe after the first couple hundred were fed and Jesus was still there pinching it off, he probably hadn't even got to the second fish yet. And he's still pulling it off, pinching it off, making a little pile of bread and fish. The disciples like, we've already fed a couple hundred people. 300 people. 500 people been fed. 1,000 people been fed. 2,000 people gotten fed. Jesus reached down and grabbed another barley loaf. Started on the second. And he just keeps pinching it off. Pulling it out. Distributing it out. this was the first seafood buffet. What happens when you go to a buffet? How many have ever left a buffet hungry? Have you ever ate at a buffet and left it hungry?
Unless they're Chinese, because Chinese are.
Yeah, unless you find yourself in the wrong kind of buffet, you're going to leave you're going to eat till you're full. Probably you're going to eat till you're full and a little bit more. You're going to eat till you get your money's worth, aren't you? Nobody leaves a buffet hungry. And what did it say here? It said, Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed to the disciples, and the disciples to them that were sent down, and likewise of the fishes, as much as they would. When they were filled, he said unto the disciples, gather up the fragments. They all had their buffet, and they ate till they were satisfied. That means they had all that they wanted. And when they had all that they wanted, there were still 12 baskets full left. What a mighty God we serve. What was the people's reaction to all this? Verse 14, it says, then those men, when they had seen the miracle that Jesus did, said, this is of a truth that prophet that should come into the world. What are they talking about? Way back in Deuteronomy, Moses had warned them, or foretold and prophesied, that one day a prophet would be raised up in their midst that would provide all that they needed. And they started speculating, this is who Moses was speaking of. Verse 16 says, or 15 says, when Jesus therefore perceived that they would come and take him by force to make him a king, he departed again into a mountain himself alone. You know that they realized that, hey, if Jesus can do this with 5 barley loaves and 2 fishes, what can Jesus not do for us? We'll never be hungry again. If he did that with barley loaves and fishes, just think what he could do with a whole cow. We'll be eating steaks all month long. Unfortunately, the people were thinking more about what Jesus could do for their stomachs than what Jesus could do for their soul. And Jesus knew it. And it wasn't his time yet to be elevated to King of Kings and Lord of Lords over all of the earth. And so he had to pull back, didn't he? And get away from the crowd and go up into the mountain alone. He was a lot like Moses. Remember, Moses provided in the wilderness. It was really God provided the manna while they were wandering in the wilderness, just like it was God in flesh that provided the miracle here with the loaves and the fishes. Jesus, well, he longed to move their thinking from the physical to the spiritual. If we kept reading, it says the next day Jesus went around the lake to Capernaum, and while he was at Capernaum, he started teaching. And in same chapter, over on verse 27, he says, laboreth not for the meat which perisheth, but for that meat which endureth unto everlasting life, which the Son of Man shall give unto you, for him hath God the Father sealed. See, when he performed the miracle, that multitude saw it and they thought, man, this guy can do anything we need. He can fill our bellies till we're completely satisfied. And Jesus started teaching them and said, I'm here to bring you to a realization that there's there's more out there than just getting your physical needs met. You know, whatever meat we have today, it perisheth. If we don't eat it, it doesn't last, does it? Well, you can put it in the refrigerator, but even then, there's things that don't last forever in the refrigerator. And as satisfied as they were with the food that Christ had provided, you know every single one of them were hungry again the next day, weren't they? That's the way things work. Think of the biggest Thanksgiving dinner you ever had. You ate that meal and you thought, oh my Lord, I can't eat another thing today. But the next morning you're like, where is that leftover turkey? It happens, doesn't it? As full as we can get, it only lasts for a day. And then we're hungry again. That's what Christ was saying. If you're only focused on the physical needs in your life, and only about getting the physical needs in your life met, those things don't last. You can be happy today. Everything could go your way. And tomorrow, chaos. Jesus is saying, I'm bringing you something that lasts longer than the physical needs. I'm bringing something that lasts longer than these loaves and fishes. Jesus wanted to satisfy their soul. And when your soul is satisfied, that's satisfaction that lasts for an eternity. An eternity. It boggles the mind. We can't think about eternity. It's too long. It's too big to grasp hold of. It's like space. You know, on the way to church this morning, or this evening, we were looking at, I guess it's Venus out there, bright in the night sky. Just as bright as it can be. And it's like, well, it's just right there. But that's so far away that it boggles the mind. How vast God's heavenly bodies are. These scriptures, we also see the disciples' weaknesses. And it's good that we see the disciples' weaknesses because it kind of lets us know they were human. In verse 5, when Jesus then lifted up his eyes and saw a great company coming to him, he saith unto Philip, whence shall we buy bread that these may eat? Now look at verse 6 real close. And this he said to prove him, for he himself knew what he would do. He did that. He asked Philip the question in order to prove Philip. What's that mean? That means that he did it in order to test his faith. Peter, over in 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 7, Peter says that sometimes your faith has to go through the fire in order for your faith to be proved on the other side. You know, faith that can't be trusted is not faith at all, is it? Faith that can't be trusted is not faith. And sometimes our faith has to be put through the trials of life, and our faith has to go through the fires of life so that it makes our faith stronger. It's not that it's pleasant. It's not that we're going to be happy doing it. Oh, thank you, Lord, for letting me suffer today. None of us prays that prayer, is it? If you do, you need to get your head examined. But a trial of faith, a trial by fire, makes you stronger. It makes you stronger. Philip was never going to forget the day Jesus took the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes. See, this wasn't so much about proving something to the crowds, I don't think. The crowds were already there because of the miracles Jesus had performed. He had compassion on the crowd. He wanted to see that the crowd got fed. But this, I think, was a miracle for the disciples. Because when Jesus said, I can do all things, maybe in their mind, yeah, I know you can do all things, but this is a multitude here. When Jesus said, I can do all things, he meant, I can do all things. If Jesus didn't mean it, he wouldn't have said it, would he? And I think the disciples also had a compassion problem. Their compassion for the crowd was just a little weak. If we look over in Matthew's account of what went on here, in Matthew it says, and when it was evening, his disciples came to him, saying, this is a desert place, and the time is now past. Send the multitude away, that they may go into the villages and buy themselves victuals. But Jesus said unto them, they need not depart, give ye them to eat. The disciples looked at that crowd and said, we don't have anything for you. It's time for you to go. The disciples were probably thinking, we'll be doing good if we just get enough for us 13 guys to have a little bit to eat. The crowd needs to go fend for themselves. Where was their compassion? That's what Jesus was saying. Where's your compassion, guys? These people are hungry. They need to be fed. And it's well within our means to do something about it. Back in John, we mentioned that Jesus taught them over at Capernaum the next day. He also said in verse 37, all that the Father giveth me shall come to me, and to him that cometh to me I will in no wise cast out. This multitude had come to Christ seeking Jesus Christ. Jesus the Christ. Jesus the Messiah. Jesus the prophet promised by Moses so long ago. The Father had provided the Messiah, and there was no way Jesus was going to cast out this multitude. He was going to provide for them if it was within his power to do so. The disciples, they didn't understand this miracle. As we said before, it couldn't be that they didn't believe. The disciples had to believe because they had seen it with their own eyes. The disciples didn't even have to have faith. Faith is all about the things that you don't see, right? There was no doubt the miracle occurred. They knew where the food came from. They knew how the food was broken up. They knew how the food was distributed. The disciples even knew how much was left over. They could have had no doubts that Jesus did the impossible. Doing the impossible is the requirement of a miracle, isn't it? If it wasn't impossible, it wouldn't be a miracle. So they had to have believed. But even though they believed it to be a miracle, they didn't believe the significance of what had been done. This was brought out a little later by the Lord. Over in Mark's account of this, let's look at it real quick. Mark said, chapter 6, verse 52 of Mark, for they considered not the miracle of the loaves, for their heart was hardened. This was after Jesus came walking out on the water in the midst of the storm to them. And he said, why did you have any doubts? Where was your doubt at? And it says they had already forgot that Jesus had provided with the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes. What's a storm in the middle of the sea to a man who distributes 5 barley loaves and 2 small fishes to 5,000 people? A storm's not meant anything for that. It says their hearts were hardened. This doesn't mean that they didn't believe. It simply meant that their minds were dull to perceive the miracle. Kind of reminds you of Pharaoh. Pharaoh saw plague after plague, miracle after miracle occurring in his own kingdom. And yet it said Pharaoh's heart was hardened. He had to believe because he saw with his own eyes. Yet he was dull to perceive what was going on. That's how the disciples were. They had become dull in their perception. I think Jesus was kind of trying to sharpen them up a bit. They were slow to perceive his power. They weren't very quick to learn, not like they should have, that Jesus had all power and could therefore allay any storms in life, any problems, any challenges, any obstacles. Jesus had the power to do so. Later on, Jesus brought it up again in Mark chapter 8. He says in verse 18, or let's go to verse 17. Why reason ye, because ye have no bread? Receive ye not yet, neither understand? Have ye your heart yet hardened? Having eyes see ye not, and having ears hear ye not, and do ye not remember? When I break the 5 loaves among 5,000, how many baskets full of fragments took ye up? They said unto him, 12. And when the 7 among 4,000, how many baskets full of fragments took ye up? And they said, 7. And he said unto them, how is it that ye do not understand? You've seen these miracles. You've seen the power displayed. Yet why do you not understand? How can you not understand? We could say the same thing for us today when we've got the Word of God and we feel His presence with us in services, and we know that we're better off with a Christ in our heart than we are in a world that's cold and topsy-turvy. How is it that we do not understand? How is it that the world doesn't understand? Well, they've hardened their hearts. They've dulled their perceptions. They can see it plain as day, but they refuse to accept what their eyes show them. I love that question that Jesus asked in verse 21 there. How is it that ye do not understand? We could say Jesus said unto those in Rosiclare, how is it that you do not understand? What's the takeaway that we need to take from this miracle of feeding the 5,000? I think there's 3 things. We've said everything else to get to this point. What do we need to learn from this? We need to learn, 1, that with Jesus, there's no problem too big to solve. With Jesus, there's no problem too big to solve. What can Jesus not handle? Nothing. With Jesus, there's no person too small to be used. What can one boy with his lunch do for a multitude of people? If Christ is in it, that's all you need. It doesn't take much. How much faith do you need to move a mountain? Little old grain of mustard seed type faith. And the third thing we need to take away from this miracle is that with Jesus, there is no hunger too deep to be satisfied. There's lots of hungers out in this world. There's physical hunger. There's people that are hungry for peace in their life. There's people that are hungry for direction in their life. There's people that are hungry for things that have been torn apart to be put back together. There's people that are hungry for happiness. There's people that are hungry for some satisfaction in their life. There's no hunger that's too deep that Jesus cannot satisfy.